A goal is only as good as its results, and the only way to see your progress is to measure. In this episode of This Meeting Sucks, we're going to walk you through the final phase in our 6-part MeetingMakers Framework, Performing and Learning, where performance is measured to see how much progress a team has made towards their vision and goals. We will discuss the importance of defining measures aligned to your goals and take you through our Measuring Performance Agenda template, which you can access for free on Session Lab using the link in the description. Buckle up, Meeting Makers. If you have been afraid of metrics and measures, do not worry. I'm going to break down everything that you need to know in order to have an effective performance measurement session. I'm your host, Lauren Green, meeting coach and facilitation trainer, here to help you unsuck your meetings one episode at a time. I've helped hundreds of professionals and organizations through leading inclusive, engaging, and productive meetings. And now I'm offering this podcast to help you do the same. Think of this podcast as an ongoing workshop, where each time you tune in, you'll get a bite-sized nugget of knowledge you can apply right away. If you lead meetings or might someday, you're in the right place. Let's make your meetings work. In a room with 15 members of a government emergency management team, I held up my stuffed panic doll. You know, the little character from Disney's Hercules. Panic in hand, I told the group that this doll represents the metrics monster, the anxiety that comes with the often eye-bleeding but necessary process of designing performance measures. I placed the doll in front of the room as an acknowledgement that this process can be tough, but also that we can have a little fun with it. I led the group through a half-day performance measures design process, starting by brainstorming measures aligned to the team's goals in small groups. Then groups consolidated their ideas into the most feasible and useful measures, and then, still in their small groups, they defined each measure more fully. Coming back together, the group worked to create a performance measurement dashboard. Each step took about an hour and included a worksheet to help make the process easy to follow. As the group worked through each step, they slowly realized that the process was not as hard as they had thought. And even more so, they found themselves getting creative about what they chose to measure and how, building more enthusiasm for future progress check-ins where they would all have a chance to see how far they got. The metrics monster was not needed after all. Metrics, measures, success factors, indicators, milestones, these terms get thrown around all the time. But why is measuring progress important anyway? Well, let's say that your team has been working on your roadmap for several months. You've completed a few tasks, but some of the things that you thought you'd be working on have been delayed, while others have fallen off the radar completely. To make things even more complicated, the organization has added new priorities to your team's docket, making it difficult to know how to adjust the other tasks that you thought you'd be working on. The team is feeling disheartened and burned out. Maybe you can relate to this situation. One way of keeping teams motivated and moving forward is by having routine progress check-ins. Imagine that you're running a 5K or a marathon for you hardcore runners out there. You're tracking how far you've gone on your fitness watch. 3K down, 2 to go. With that little boost of confidence, knowing that you've already made it more than halfway, you kick it up a notch. Teams need this too. Tracking progress should not be a meaningless chore. It should be treated as an opportunity to celebrate how far a team has gone and boost energy towards the finish line. For many teams and organizations, developing performance measures can feel like an eye bleeder. Part of the reason for this is that often the measures that teams are looking at don't have a real connection to the work that they're doing. A lot of teams are measuring things because they've always measured them without really ever questioning them. That's sort of like running a 5K, but instead of tracking the distance that you've traveled, you're tracking the number of spectators or the number of water breaks. Why do these things matter when the purpose of the run is to cover a certain distance? The process of designing measures is part of a larger strategy process. Some organizations refer to this as OKR, or Objectives and Key Results. In order for it to be meaningful, it has to tie directly into the things that we want to accomplish. When teams design measures that matter to their work, the process of tracking them is rewarding and motivating. Measuring performance tells a story of how teams are achieving their goals, vision, and mission. When done well, measuring performance can also help teams know when they may be falling short and work together to make important adjustments to their process. Some organizations require certain aspects of their work to be measured, perhaps to be aligned with the larger organizational strategy. But assuming that a team can align on its own set of measures, let's dive into a process for how they might do so. First, terms like measures and metrics tend to be used as synonyms, but there are some key differences. A measure is the thing that we are looking at, whereas a metric or indicator is the actual number, whether it be a percentage, an average, a sum, etc. If you've heard the term KPI, this stands for Key Performance Indicators. The process we're going through to identify measures and metrics could be used by a team to identify its KPIs. A measure should answer the question, how will we know that we're successful? And a metric is the specific number that we're aiming for. For example, going back to our 5K analogy, we could say that a performance measure is the distance of a run, and our target metric would be 5 kilometers. Do you see? The measure is the definition, and the metric is the actual number. Sometimes we may include a target as well as a baseline or minimum metric. For example, a baseline could be to get at least halfway or 2.5K. This baseline helps us to ensure that even if ideal results aren't being achieved, that enough progress is still being made to keep us moving forward. Similarly, a milestone is a benchmark or stop along the way. For example, crossing the 1K, 2K, 3K, and 4K marks could be considered milestones. A good measurement process should have a few measures so that it's focused on what really matters as well as technically feasible to track. They should also be consistent with any organizational expectations as well as reward structures and management styles. Let's move on to a few other terms. A success factor, on the other hand, is more qualitative. For instance, we could say that positive self-talk is a factor that could help us reach our target metric of a 5K. With a success factor, the value of the data can be more subjective, but may provide some additional insights to the wants and needs of an audience or consumer. It's important to understand the difference between these terms, but also acknowledge that for some teams, defining a measure and target metric is enough. Other teams may want to define multiple measures, targets, and baseline metrics for each, as well as milestones and timeframes for completing each goal. It all depends on organizational requirements, how robust the project management process is, and what is most helpful for the team. It's important to also acknowledge that designing measures, especially for the first time, can lead to anxiety for many teams and leaders. Measures imply that someone or someones will be held accountable if they are not achieved. We may not be able to resolve this anxiety in full, but by designing measures collaboratively, we can take ownership of the process and be more aware of when we risk falling short. For the purposes of this episode, we are going to follow on our process from the last episode on mapping the way forward and identify one measure for each goal identified, plus a baseline and target metric to go alongside it. As always, you can find our free Session Lab templates linked in the description, along with our mural, online whiteboard, or printer-friendly poster templates available for purchase. Facilitation and meeting skills are life skills, and they are often so easy to understand and implement that you'll be wondering why you didn't learn them in grade school. If you are ready to make meeting skills a core competency in your team or organization, our in-house meeting skill trainings and workshops can be customized to address your biggest needs and roadblocks. And if you're serious about taking your organization's meetings to the next level, we can work with you to deliver a customized plan to mature meeting practices across the organization. Visit our website to learn more, and if you're ready to get started, reach out to makemeetings.work/contact to partner with us and make your meetings work. Now let's talk through our measuring performance workshop. Like most of our workshops that we've talked through in this season, they are about a full day long. However, you can always modify them by splitting up the different segments across multiple shorter sessions, especially if you are having online meetings. Our day starts at 9 a.m. and goes to 3:30, so it's not a full day. We always recommend starting with a welcome and kickoff to solidify the outcomes, and then follow that with a walkthrough of the agenda and meeting agreements. We have provided a few suggested meeting agreements that are available in our Session Lab template, but you can also use your own meeting agreements that you feel are best for your team or for the purposes of the session. After that, we always recommend doing introductions or a check-in. If people don't know each other, definitely go around and have each person share their name and role and maybe a hope for today's meeting. But if people already know each other, then maybe simply sharing a hope for the day's meeting is enough. Before we do any real work, we always recommend starting with an energizer, something that's going to get people warmed up to being able to articulate the value of tracking performance. Our energizer takes about 20 minutes, and we call it a metrics mixer. First, you're going to invite participants to think of one thing that they track regularly. For example, counting steps, logging food, or maybe your screen time. Invite participants to share what they track and why it matters to them. Then reflect as a team, which you would either do in tables or as a large group, depending on how you have formatted this activity. You can provide these questions. What do you notice across all of the things that we track? What is important about tracking these things? What might tracking team measures enable? An energizer like this gets people to connect the idea of measuring their performance as a team to something that they're already familiar with. Now we're ready to review the team goals. If you don't have any team goals, we definitely recommend checking out the previous two episodes, episodes 8 and 9. They will give you everything that you need in order to define the team's vision and goals. But assuming that your team already has clearly defined goals, you're going to use a little bit of time to briefly reshare them, clarify any questions, and note that over the day, the group is going to be building towards a performance measures dashboard that's aligned to these goals. And then walk through the dashboard. You can use ours or you can make your own, but we include a dashboard that has measures, metrics, target, and baseline, the data source of those metrics, the collection method, and the reporting frequency. So measures, metrics, data source, collection method, and reporting frequency. That is the basic metrics dashboard. Before we dive into the process, it's also a good idea to do a little bit of an introduction to measuring performance as a process. And in our Session Lab agenda template, we've included these talking points. You can start by saying, measuring performance is part of a complete strategic planning process. It helps us to know where we are at any point. It can help us celebrate progress and course correct along the way. It can also help us communicate where we are more broadly. Setting performance measures involves defining what we're measuring and the actual number that we're aiming for, or metric. Sometimes we will also come up with a baseline metric or minimum as well. It's up to us to identify what measures will work best for our team, and here are some categories for consideration: quantitative and volume measures, qualitative and feedback measures, financial and cost measures, impact-based measures, and time-based measures. And in our Session Lab agenda template, we provide examples for each one of those categories. Now we're going to dive into brainstorming measures. Ideally, ahead of time, you have added each of your team's goals to the top of a flip chart as the title, one flip chart per goal. Take about 20 minutes or more to allow the team to brainstorm measures for each goal, one measure per sticky note, using the examples as necessary to guide their thinking. To save time, you could break up participants into pairs and invite them to work on any goal that they want to for a few minutes before moving on to the next. And remind participants that for now, they want to focus on what they can look at rather than the numbers or percentages. For example, we want to look at distance run, not necessarily the 5K. Once the idea flow starts to slow, or it seems like participants have completed most of the stations, ask whether there are any questions about what any of the measures mean. Lastly, invite participants to work either in their pairs or different small groups to group and cluster similar measures together for that goal and remove any duplicates wherever possible so that what is left on each flip chart is a consolidated list of measures for each goal. A couple tips for this: some groups align measures to other categories beyond goals, such as stages of their process. And if that's the case, you could consider outlining your team's normal processes using our process mapping workshop first. Another tip is that small teams of maybe 5 or 6 people or fewer could actually brainstorm measures one goal at a time instead of using our station approach. But this may end up requiring more time than the 45 minutes allotted. So just bear in mind that if you try to have everybody do one measure at a time and brainstorm, you might need potentially an hour and a half or more to get through that process. In our agenda, we have a break at 10:45. And then at 11, we are coming back in to align on key measures. First, consider how many measures you may want to track. This may have already been done in advance. You could let the team know that, of course, we want to measure everything that they came up with, but this could be very burdensome over time. So we need to narrow down to 1 or 2 measures per goal to make it more manageable. And then invite the team to vote on the measures that they think are most closely aligned with their goals, as well as feasible to measure. You could consider using a dot vote here for the top 3 measures or some kind of virtual polling tool like Mentimeter. For each goal, they need to vote and get it down to 1 or 2 measures per goal. Then you're going to tally up the votes and highlight the number of measures for each one. Then run a consensus check for each goal. So a consensus check involves going through each goal and asking, are there any objections to this 1 or 2 measures being the final ones? And if there are objections, you invite some discussion. It could be that the team opts for 2 measures for a specific goal, maybe 3, or they can merge it together in some way. So there's going to be a little bit of discussion here around each goal in order to vote, tally, and do that consensus check. And then you're going to show the team our dashboard template or your version of it, and you're going to add the final measures to the dashboard as rows along the left side. Over the rest of the day, we're going to be adding more column headers so that you are creating what is eventually going to become your spreadsheet for tracking the data for each of these measures. If you want to, you can also add the goals to your dashboard as well, so that it's clear which measures align to which goals. So then we've got an hour-long lunch break. Following the lunch break, if you like, we've got another energizer. We call this pipe cleaner glasses, and this is to help us get in the mindset of tracking performance in a fun, creative way. You will need pipe cleaners, a set of numbered cards 1 through 10, 1 per judge, we'll get to that in a second, a flip chart to tally the final scores, and if you'd like to, you can have prizes. Nominate 1 to 3 people to serve as judges, and then set up a supply of pipe cleaners to individuals or small groups, the same number for each person or group. Instruct the individuals or small groups to create a set of wearable glasses using the pipe cleaners. Judges will score each set of glasses on a scale from 1 to 10. The glasses will be judged based on wearability, aesthetic, and creativity. Give them 10 minutes to design their glasses, and as an option, you can present a prize for the highest scoring frame as an incentive. After the timers, judges score each team individually, tally up the scores on a flip chart, and announce the winner. Then reflect as a whole group. How did knowing what you were going to be scored on impact how you built the glasses? How might we apply these insights to our team measurement process? If you're doing this online, you can invite teams to design glasses using a program such as Mural, and you can consider setting limitations such as no usage of AI or must create using only lines and shapes. Now you've got your measures aligned to each goal, so of course it's time to identify metrics. In this next activity, starting at 1:30 in our agenda, and we've given it an hour, we have identifying target and baseline metrics for each measure. Review the types of measures identified earlier in the day. Then, brainstorm target and baseline metrics for each. For smaller groups, participants could brainstorm target and baseline metrics on stickies, 1 metric per sticky, and add them directly to the dashboard. For larger groups, it may work best to work on measures in stations or breakout groups, and then transfer the finals to the dashboard. Note for teams that the goal is to design a target and baseline metric that is feasible to achieve within the specified timeline. If indecision or debate arises, invite the group to consider the following questions. Which metric would provide the best data for this measure? Which metric is most feasible? For instance, do we have the sources of data necessary for it and/or a collection method that we can feasibly do? How might we combine these metrics and create the best of both or all? Then add the final target and baseline metrics to the dashboard to the right of where the measures have been captured so that it's clear which metrics align with which measure. Once participants align on a target and baseline metric, they might go a step further to identify a desired reporting frequency, data sources for that metric, and perhaps even a collection method. That will add more time to this part of the agenda, and not all teams need that information. But if you want a robust process, it's good to document those things. This is also an activity where you could break into smaller pairs or groups to start the brainstorming process. If participants are struggling with a single metric, just move on and come back to it later. In some situations, the leader or project manager or a smaller group may need to revisit any stuck points as next steps. So try not to get stuck on this. Again, the goal is to identify the actual number that we're trying to reach and what the minimum is. So in our agenda, we've got a break for about 15 minutes, and then we move on to the final step, which we've given about 40 minutes, which is the process for review. And in this last few minutes, we're asking groups to determine the next steps for finalizing the measures and creating their shared digital dashboard. So first, invite participants to identify any measure or metrics that still need further development and add these to a next steps chart. For each one, ask who would be the best person or people to work on it. If the team does not currently have a digital dashboard to track their measures, invite suggestions for the best way to set one up. For example, a shared Google Sheet. If not already determined, invite suggestions for how often to report on measures and when would be an appropriate time. For instance, the group may decide to collect measures monthly as part of a look back and lesson learned session. Agile teams may incorporate a measures review as part of a normal retrospective cycle. If the team gets stuck, it may be important for the team leader or project manager to make a final call on how to best implement a performance measures dashboard and review process. We always recommend closing with parting words, perhaps having the leader share appreciation and clarifying next steps. And that brings us to the end of Season 4, Meet Your Way to a High-Performing Team. Over the last 10 episodes, we have walked you through the MeetingMakers Framework step by step, from starting a team to measuring its results. You have learned how to initiate projects, build trust, align on what matters most, envision the future, map the way forward, and now measure what success really looks like. Remember, high-performing teams don't just happen. They are built intentionally, one meeting at a time. Whether you are just getting started or refining your process, keep practicing, keep learning, and keep showing up for your team. If you have loved this season, Meeting Makers, please be sure to share this episode with your team and colleagues. Until next time, let's make your meetings work. This podcast was written by Lauren Green and produced by Caitlin Murray. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a few seconds to rate and review so future Meeting Makers can find our community. You can find our next Meeting Makers Academy workshop on our website at www.makemeetings.work/academy. Want help with your next meeting? Reach out at makemeetings.work/contact and we'll set up time to chat.